In today's Locked On Pelicans, I'll tell you why Zion Williamson's name being in trade rumors says a lot about the team, more than you're thinking. Plus, we're rounding up all the other trade rumors in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this, Thursday. I'm losing track of all the days with the holiday here. Game day for your New Orleans Pelicans taking on the Houston Rockets. We'll recap that in tomorrow's show. But today we're getting into all of the trade rumors and Zion's name being in trade rumors, just being in trade rumors, says a lot about the direction of the team or maybe lack thereof. And I'll explain what I mean in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Plus, we'll look at Ingram, CJ McCollum, and a couple of other trade targets here in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 fans on YouTube as well. We are the number one Pelicans podcast for a reason. So let's get into just the trade rumors and just lay them all out there. What I'm hearing around the league as well. One thing I want to mention though, and lead off with this is, yeah, it is kind of not open season on the Pelicans, but they are willing to listen to offers for almost everybody. No Herb Jones, no Trey Murphy, no DeJounte Murray, no Yves Missi are the four guys that are probably like the most untouchable on the team. Trey and Herb, definitely not available. Missi, Murray, it's got to be like an exorbitant price for either of those two guys. So they're kind of safe here. But one name that isn't safe is Zion Williamson. And I think that is a really interesting thing to see. And you've seen the Athletic report on it and clutch points. Clutch points can be hit or miss. But they're reporting that, everyone is kind of like the big three of the Pelicans, Zion Williamson, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, we'll look at all three of those in today's show, are on the trade block, and the Pelicans are listening to offers, even if they're not actively shopping them. So I find the Zion one to be pretty interesting. And look, let's be smart about this here. They're willing to listen to offers. It doesn't mean they're like, we got to get rid of him here. But if they're willing to listen to offers, that says they have some long-term doubts about Zion Williamson in a way that they maybe haven't had before. If a team calls about Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, teams can call and the Pelicans can be like, yeah, we're not interested in trading them at all. Goodbye. And you hang up the phone. Here, if they call about Zion Williamson, they go, okay, what's your offer? We'll listen. That wasn't the case over the summer. I don't think they were thinking about trading him at all after the season that he had just had last year being healthy. And now it seems like there's been a shift in their belief in Zion, that he's maybe not the franchise cornerstone that they had kind of been hoping for, that the Zion 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, whatever 0.0 we're on right now isn't actually going to be able to work long term. And look, this hamstring injury again, right? Even if he did all the right things, say he did all the right things, and this hamstring injury still happened, that's a concern that is he ever going to be healthy? And I think that's an open question right now. And if he didn't do all of the right things, well, then that's also a big concern, because what does that say about his approach to the game in his career? So this signals they don't believe in him like they once did, and they're willing to listen to, trade offers for him. And look, they should listen to trade offers for Zion Williamson at this point. You just can't keep living like this, right? Like, it's always something, and you just can't keep living like that when it's always something. So this is a pretty big shift, I think, in their perspective. And we talked about in yesterday's show, go listen to the Christmas Day show if you haven't. That's about as important of an episode, I think, that I've recorded in a long time about this team. They need to figure out if he is going to be that franchise cornerstone or not, and it might hinge on what's going on the rest of the season here. There's no need to trade him. unless you just don't want to do it and you just want to get something and kind of get out from that contract and go with a complete rebuild. But I don't think that's really what the team wants to do. But them just listening to offers for Zion Williamson, not going after like Scoot Henderson and being like, we want that guy. We'll trade Zion if it means we get Scoot Henderson. This is them being like, hey, we maybe don't want to build around this guy anymore. And that is a bit of not a surprise, because I think it's the smart thing to do, but that hasn't been their thinking, fully in the past. So this definitely shows that this hamstring injury and maybe some of the bad press around him too has kind of adjusted their long-term view about how you build this franchise and try and go and compete and who your franchise cornerstone player is. And maybe you could say they don't have one right now, the guy that you're fully building around. In terms of trades in this season and rumored options for Zion Williamson, the one that's really come up a lot is the Golden State Warriors. I've seen them listed as an option, and I think that would be interesting. You could definitely build a package around Wiggins there. Maybe I've seen Draymond Green thrown in there, a future first-round pick, Jonathan Kuminga. I think New Orleans would probably jump on a deal like that, truthfully, if that's what it was offered, but I don't really see that being a realistic offer from the Golden State Warriors. I don't think they want to be in the Zion Williamson business. As you watch them on Christmas Day and recently, they're a team that needs someone who can compete right now and help them right now. And Zion, I don't know if that they're going to view him as that guy currently in the moment. A dark horse team that I would definitely keep an eye on, minus one thing, and we'll talk about it, is the Detroit Pistons. They look competent. Shows you how bad of a job Monty Williams did with that franchise last year, but they look like a competent team that's winning some games. They just beat the Boston Celtics. Cade Cunningham should be an all-star this year. And if you think he's kind of like your 1A or your number one, does Zion make sense as a 2? And putting him with an elite guard like that next to Cade Cunningham and giving Cade that kind of running mate, I think makes an awful lot of sense there. But is that too similar to their deal for Blake Griffin? I don't even know how long ago it was at this point. Though that didn't work out long-term with the injuries to Blake Griffin and him just not being that same kind of guy. That was a Stan Van Gundy era. That was also some of the most successful basketball they've had in a really, really long time. So maybe that is worth doing again. And maybe that is something they want to repeat if they just want to get some of these young guys some of that postseason experience. If you think it would be Zion Williamson, you could get Jalen Duren. You could maybe get a guy like Jaden Ivey in a deal like that. They have some interesting young players and future first-round picks that I think you could try and grab from them to make a deal like that work. I think it makes sense for Detroit, but I also can see them being a little bit resistant to a move like that, given it has so many shades of the Blake Griffin deal. But that is something that could really work. What do you think about either of those two rumored destinations for Zion Williamson? What do you think about him just being in trade talks? The right move, not the right move? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, the Brandon Ingram situation still remains difficult, but I think you're starting to see things loosen up a bit with two teams that are maybe feeling a little bit desperate, and we'll talk about that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by my go-to ticketing app, Game Time. Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season, and that means bringing people together at live events. The experience is just so much better when there's more people there. And I love Game Time because of all the features it has. It has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. And Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They have so many other features too. I always toggle the all-in pricing up front. You got to do that. And when you do it, there's no surprise fees at checkout. You see the price, you know what you're paying. They also have the seat view. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you're going to know exactly what you're going to get when you show up to the venue. And the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section and row for less. So now is always the best time to buy with Game Time. And it's for concerts, comedy, theater, and sporting events as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money is going to help you save money this new year. Do you have subscriptions that you're still paying for that you don't even realize it? I actually had a few, and I used Rocket Money to help me track them all down and then cancel them. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings together everything all in one place, which is what I love. It's multiple different apps. That's too difficult. They need to all be in one place, and that's what Rocket Money does. So whatever your goals are this year, they're going to help you hit them, whether it's canceling subscriptions, monitoring your spending habits. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Think about what you could use $740 for. So go cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on, rocketmoney.com/locked-on. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now go to LockedOnDaily.com and sign up for the new free Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter, one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. So we're talking all sorts of trade rumors here for the New Orleans Pelicans. It's not like open season. It's not a fire sale on this. I still think the team plans to build around Zion Williamson, but if you make the right offer, they'll definitely move him, pivot, and do things differently. What about, though, Brandon Ingram and some other players, too? We're going to look at CJ McCollum in the next segment because there's one team that he's linked to that I just don't see how it would work, but another team that, yeah, I could see that, actually. So let's get into Brandon Ingram. I think, that is still a little bit tricky because of his future contract situation. He's an expiring deal. He wants a new big money deal. How comfortable are you committing big time money to him? An Ingram trade also might be held up by Jimmy Butler. Yesterday, Shams Charania of ESPN, now that's still weird to say, mentioned that Jimmy Butler kind of wants out. It wasn't like an official trade request or anything like that, but doesn't really plan to re-sign with the Miami Heat, doesn't want to be with the Miami Heat next year and wants to get traded to Houston or the Phoenix Suns, or maybe a couple of other teams too. Maybe the Golden State Warriors make sense for him as well. He plays a similar position, not the same kind of player, but similar enough to Brandon Ingram. And Jimmy Butler is probably better, much, much older. So the ages are very different there. Jimmy Butler costs more money this year too. So trying to make a trade could be more difficult because of that. But if you're waiting for kind of like dominoes to fall, is a Jimmy Butler move ahead of a Brandon Ingram trade? And I think that could be the case. And so if a team like the Golden State Warriors would want Brandon Ingram, but you can go and get Jimmy Butler, is that what they end up doing? Maybe they give Jimmy Butler a 2-year deal after this season, not locking him in for 5 years at his age, because that would seem a little bit foolish, especially with kind of like the tread on his tires, on his legs there as well. So I do wonder if a Brandon Ingram deal now is more complicated by Jimmy Butler being there for the taking for a number of different teams. And so that's something to keep an eye on too. And with Ingram's contract situation, that's still going to be a sticking point. I don't think it's as bad as teams want to make it out to be or people want to make it out to be. There's no money in free agency. The Miami Heat aren't worried about just losing Jimmy Butler in free agency for nothing because the Nets are going to have the cap space to sign him, and that's about it. Same goes for Brandon Ingram. So I don't think that this is something that they're totally scared about of losing these guys for nothing. You'll still at least need to facilitate a sign-and trade during the offseason. And if you do that, you're still going to get stuff in return, useful things at that. And that's kind of like what you would get back now for Brandon Ingram. So it's still complicated, but it's still definitely doable. And I think you're going to start to see some desperate teams. So one team that was desperate, being a little bit less desperate right now, is the Indiana Pacers. They've been on a pretty good tear and looking like the team from last year, but it feels like they definitely need some punch. They're 15-15. I think they've won 5 in a row. They have won 5 in a row right now. So it seems like they've gotten their footing back, but think about it. That means they were 10-15 at one point. That's not an ideal place for a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals last season. They need some more punch. It definitely feels like that. Ingram makes sense for them. They don't really have those kind of elite wings that would kind of bump someone out of the starting spot that should be in the starting lineup. So that would work. It puts Benedict Mathurin probably on the bench. Like, that's what it would be. I think you can live with something like that. Or Andrew Nembhard, something like that. Could be on the bench if that were the case. That works out kind of fine for both of those players in Indiana. The rumored thing is that they're maybe open to trading Miles Turner. And while you think New Orleans doesn't need a center now because of Yves Missi, and admittedly they don't need one as much, look, I still think, and we'll talk about Yves Missi probably on Monday, early next week, about Rookie of the Year. Miles Turner still, if you're going to build around Zion Williamson, is probably a better fit than Yves Missi. So Miles Turner at 29 this season can kind of be a stopgap to make you more competitive next season. Grow with Missi a little bit before Missi's really ready for a much bigger role. Just because he's starting doesn't have an outsized role on the team. Miles Turner would. And when we talked about that starting lineup we want to see, that was DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Yves Missi. Is there enough shooting in that lineup? And that's the big question. Miles Turner getting shooting from the center position, a stretch five, something we've wanted to see next to Zion Williamson, an elite stretch five, so not just like anybody who could just shoot threes but doesn't do anything else. It's really intriguing, and that's something we'd like to see. Could you do a Brandon Ingram for Miles Turner trade and then just call it a day? And I think that could be a move that seems like it wouldn't be bad for New Orleans to try and do. Miles Turner, I think he's on an expiring deal. I can't remember if he signed an extension or not. Doesn't look like it from what I'm seeing here. So, you need to re-sign him. What would that look like? That could be a little bit scary here, but this is a way that New Orleans could shed some money, get under the luxury tax, have a long-term piece, and then kind of quickly pivot to being maybe more competitive next season. DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Miles Turner seems like a very competitive team that is more balanced out there than with Yves Missi. And look, Turner's more of a rim protector than Missi is. That's appealing too. So keep that in mind when you're making a move for with Brandon Ingram here, that you could just jump right back into contention next year while in a better financial situation against the salary cap. The other team, though, that looks absolutely desperate would be the Sacramento Kings. They have not played well. It's not working like they should. They went after DeMar DeRozan, and that probably kind of closed the book on their interest in Brandon Ingram. But at this point, they need to do something. They need to do something here, it feels like. And I don't think it's going to be trading De'Aaron Fox. I think they would move Sabonis first. Could you trade Brandon Ingram for Domantas Sabonis and go with that and see what that does? Maybe. Could you maybe get Keegan Murray in salary filler? Potentially. That's a team that I think you should look at that's like, okay, we didn't do this right in the offseason. We need to do something else here. Maybe we're feeling desperate. Let's go after Brandon Ingram and see what that ends up looking like. I don't think the Lakers are going to be interested in bringing Brandon Ingram back. More on the Lakers in the next segment, by the way. But that's something maybe to keep an eye on. The Golden State Warriors, if maybe it doesn't work out for Jimmy Butler, could be an option too. We've long had them kind of linked to, the Detroit Pistons linked to Brandon Ingram as well, though I don't know if Trajan Langdon would like to do that. But look, he's a big believer, from what I understand, in Brandon Ingram. So maybe if they want to kind of make that team more competitive and you don't want to take on the same kind of injury risk as the Zion Williamson trade would be. So that's kind of where you stand there. It's still complicated, but I think things are going to start opening up a little bit sooner as teams start to get a little bit more desperate. Maybe the most interesting out of all the players is CJ McCollum. There's two teams linked to him. I like one trade. One other deal is really tough to figure out. Let's look at those two teams. A surprising one as the betting favorite, by the way, per FanDuel. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. And now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For specific product disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. We're going to be here all week, all holiday week here, giving you a show every single day. We'll look at Yves Missi early in the week. We'll recap the Rockets game, what we saw from this team. Hopefully better effort in tomorrow, Friday's show as well. I'll be back home soon enough with a better, back in the studio here and everything as well. So I appreciate you bearing with me with what it looks like on here, though it looks fine. So, for your second listen, Locked On Saints. Do big changes need to come after that Monday night debacle against the Green Bay Packers? Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints talking about the wake-up call the New Orleans Saints need. That's over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make them your second listen today after making Locked On Pelicans your first listen and becoming an everydayer, which means you listen Monday through Friday. Give me the everydayer comments down below on YouTube. So let's wrap up the show talking about CJ McCollum here. And when you look at some of these guys, we'll get into one or two others as well in this segment here. But CJ is going to be the other big trade piece. And this is what I've said. My hot take was they don't trade Brandon Ingram this season. They trade CJ McCollum, and then you re-sign Brandon Ingram to like a 1-and-1 deal. I've been saying that since the offseason. CJ McCollum sounds like he's starting to get a whole bunch more traction on the trade market here with two teams linked to him. Per FanDuel, the betting favorite, if he's traded, is the Milwaukee Bucks. They're going to reunite Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, alongside Giannis. You hear me go silent there because, I don't know what to make of that one, truthfully. It doesn't sound like that makes any sense to me. And then when you actually try and make a deal work, it's even tougher. So that's why I don't know if those odds are exactly right. So the Bucks are a second apron team. If you're like a diehard NBA guy, you've heard second apron. When you hit the second apron, which is basically a level of spending, with the way the salary cap structure works here, second apron means you're spending so much money, you're deep into the luxury tax, that they don't like that. It's not good for competitive balance. So we want to make it harder for you to make your team good and maybe mean you need to dismantle your team. So there are restrictions on the type of trades you can do, the moves that you can make to improve your roster. The Milwaukee Bucks have also kind of stabilized a little bit after the beginning part of the regular season. Now, they're doing it by beating up on some pretty bad teams, but that wasn't something that they were doing earlier on in the year, so that's at least a good thing for them. But being a second apron team, one thing they cannot do is aggregate salary. And when two teams are over the salary cap, when you're making a trade, basically the outgoing salary needs to be very, very close to the incoming salary. And what you're not allowed to do is aggregate salary. So you can't take two $15 million guys, trade them for one $30 million guy. You can if you're over the first apron, but not if you're over the second apron. The Milwaukee Bucks are into the second apron. So basically any trade needs to be them sending out one guy and getting one or more guys back, but they can't send out two guys in the same sort of trade. So the only real big movable salary near CJ McCollum's $33 million is Chris Middleton at 31 or so. And when you try and make this deal work, it's off by about $1.5 million. So it's not like you could include a $1.5 million guy in the trade, send him to New Orleans. So it's Chris Middleton, a $1.5 million guy for CJ McCollum. That is not allowed. You can't even do that with a third team taking on the $1.5 million guy. So them landing CJ McCollum is very, very tough to make work under the current salary cap, the current collective bargaining agreement restrictions that are on the Milwaukee Bucks right now. So I don't see how you can really make that happen. And that becomes pretty difficult all of a sudden. There's a reason I'm not running a franchise or a salary cap guru or expert, because I'm sure there's a way to make it work. But based off what I know about this, which is a good bit, I think, this one seems a little bit tough. The other team that's been linked to CJ McCollum that I think makes a whole lot more sense is the Los Angeles Lakers. And you can find a variety of trades that work for making this happen. Now, the Lakers are playing pretty good basketball right now. LeBron James is kind of back in the swing of things and looks pretty good. But this is a team that's 28th in terms of three-point attempts. They're 20th in terms of three-point percentage. They want to shoot more threes, especially under first-year head coach J.J. Redick. So does CJ McCollum make some sense for them? And I think it does. So they have 2 tradable first-round picks. You kind of want one of them in a deal because you're going to be taking on some salary too. Basically, any trade for CJ McCollum with the Lakers is going to be centered around D'Angelo Russell coming to New Orleans. He's on a $18 million expiring deal. And then maybe Rui Hachimura, who's got one more year left after this for about $18 million. If you include a first-round pick, and that's important for one more thing here, I think you can get that deal done pretty easily. I think New Orleans would jump on that. That's kind of what you're looking for in any sort of CJ McCollum trade. Some expiring salary for salary cap relief next year and a mid-tier salary guy, $18 to $20 million like Hachimura, that you can then trade later down the line next season or in the offseason. That deal between those two guys makes a ton of sense for New Orleans. I don't even know if you necessarily, in a vacuum, need a first-round pick for that. Maybe a second-round pick, something. But what that deal does is increases the salary for New Orleans by about $2 million. D'Angelo Russell and Hachimura increases by about $2 to $2.5 million for New Orleans. They're already into the luxury tax by about $2 million or so, a little bit under that. So you're adding $2 million to that. So if they want to duck under it, you're looking at a $3.5 to $4 million salary dump, and that becomes a little bit more difficult to pull off. That's not the same as just waiving or getting rid of, not waiving, but trading away in a salary dump a minimum contract guy. So that becomes a little bit more difficult to do. So you're going to need something from the Lakers to make you have to figure out what your next move is going to be. New Orleans can keep the same roster, duck the luxury tax very easily this season. You trade CJ for more salary? No, it becomes a little bit tougher. So if you're going to make a team have to do that, we need some additional draft capital here to sweeten the deal because otherwise this isn't looking as good as we'd like it to be. So you'd need to make another trade to get under the luxury tax after this if it's just straight up D'Angelo Russell, Hachimura for CJ McCollum. But I think that's a deal that New Orleans could be interested in if it came to it. Look, you could probably put CJ and Daniel Tice in there. I think they'd do that. And that kind of negates that $2 million or so. So that kind of fixes some of that. New Orleans still needs to make another trade, but at least they're in a better financial situation. And those are the type of things that they're weighing right now. So that's kind of all the trade rumors. Certain other guys to kind of keep an eye on, I think, when it comes to this is Jose Alvarado. He's on a poison pill deal, meaning you've got to kind of add more salary to him this year if you're sending him out. I think he could get moved for the right deal. I don't want that. He's one of my favorite players on the team, but I think he's a guy that, look, if you to try and get a deal done, we need Jose in there. I think they would include him in that pretty easily. The rest of the roster, I don't know if those are guys that teams are going to be massively interested in. When you look at it, if you're not going to trade DeJounte Murray, Hawkins, you can move for somebody if you needed to, but I'd rather keep him. After that, it just isn't. Teams aren't going to have an interest in Antonio Reeves or Carlo Makovich outside of just salary filler when it comes to it. So you're looking at the big three. Zion, Ingram, and McCollum is really the guys that could be traded away from the New Orleans Pelicans. And let me know what you think. I think them being open to listening to Zion trades is eye-opening. It says a lot about their lack of belief in him than where they were before, and that's due to this injury. And that maybe means the direction of your, one, if you keep him, how good do you feel about that? We'll talk about that in the offseason if that ends up happening. And if you trade him, that they're just like, yeah, we just don't see it working out here for any reason. And I think that's very telling. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Happy holidays to you, your families, your loved ones as well. And as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at Nolan Jake on Twitter. This has been the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll see y'all tomorrow.